Hey, this is Jake, and today we're going to show you how to check your fluids, belts, and hoses. So part of regular maintenance is just to make sure and check our fluids on a regular basis, see what kind of condition they're in, what the level's at, what they look like, as well as our coolant hoses and our belts. So today we're going to show you how to do that. We're going to go through all the things on this car in particular, and then we'll talk about how you check the Serpentine belt and also how you check the hoses on this as preventative maintenance to make sure everything is running properly and everything is in good condition. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with what's just under the hood here. What you probably will want to do is get your owner's manual out and check your owner's manual to see where everything's at as far as where it's located under the hood. This one has a diagram of my owner's manual where everything's located. But we're going to go ahead and just start with our engine oil. That's kind of one basic thing that you need to be able to check. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pull out the dipstick that says, this one says engine oil on it. But again, you want to look in your owner's manual and see where it's located. And usually this will be a color. Sometimes it will say engine oil or have a picture of an oil can on the dipstick. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this out, grab a rag, we're going to wipe this off, clean this off, and then we're going to go ahead and insert it back down the tube. We're going to dip it in a couple seconds, pull it back out, and then we're going to check our level. So our level here, let me turn this, that's full, that's low. So I'm about 3, well, actually that's full. I can see the F right here. That's full, that's low. And so I want it between the bottom where that dot is and the mark here where the F is. That's the range I want this in. That's what I'm looking for. If it's at low or below, I want to add a quart to bring it up to that full mark. If it's dark, that's okay. If it's really black, that's probably time to change it. If it's very thin, if it just drips off the tip of this, that's usually a sign that it's contaminated with fuel. Another thing you can do is just smell it. And if it smells like gas, then it's probably time to change it as well. This is all based on maintenance on your records. As far as maintenance goes, you want to check your maintenance log and see what it requires, how many miles, or how often things should be changed. The next thing, we have transmission. This is our transmission dipstick. It's going to be a little bit different than our oil. We're going to do some things that are similar. But on this particular car, we need the engine running while we're checking the fluid in our transmission. So let's go ahead and turn it on. So you also want to follow the manufacturer specifications on this as far as sometimes it'll say put it in park, reverse, neutral, drive, low, and put it back up just to push it through the gears and then come and check it. They at least want you to warm up and be moving inside the transmission. So while it's running, I'm going to pull this out, wipe it off, put it back in, pull it out, and then we're going to see where we're at. So we are at, this is full, low is right about here. So we're about 2/3 above the low mark, which is fine. The other thing I'm looking for on this is I'm looking for a nice red color on this. It should be nice and red. If it's dark or brown or black, it's probably time to change it. If it's just dripping off really fast, this isn't too bad. That's okay. That's fine. Also, if it has a burn smell, when you smell this, if it has a burn smell, that's also a sign that the fluid's done and you're going to need to change it. One key thing about this is if we need to add more, we do not add a quart at a time. We only add 1 pint at a time, which is half a quart. 1 pint at a time to take it from low or add to that full mark. If we add a whole quart, we're actually going to overfill it. Again, so just from low to the add, that's just 1 pint. 1 pint, not 1 quart. The next thing we're going to check is our power steering, and we have a reservoir right here. It's just attached to the pump, so I'm going to pull this out. It's got a small dipstick on here, like this. So just wipe it off. Dip that down into the reservoir. Make sure you get it all the way down and pick it up. And you can see here, it's cold. Here's the add mark right here, and I'm actually below that mark a little bit. I want it between this mark and this mark when it's cold, If my engine had been running for a while, I would want it between the add mark and the hot mark, because the fluid will expand as the engine warms up, and as it's working, it may come up here, but you can see here, I'm actually below that add mark, so I'm gonna have to add some. Generally, this is the same fluid as a transmission fluid. It should be a nice red color. If you smell it, and again, if it has a burn smell, you want to replace it and change it out. But that's what we're looking for. We're looking between our add and full at cold or hot, depending on how hot or cold your engine is. And we're looking for usually for that nice red color, and we don't want that burn smell from our fluid. So the next thing we're going to check is our cooling system. We have two places where we need to check our coolant on this car. One is this overflow tank over here. We need to check the level. And then we have our radiator cap here that's on a radiator that holds pressure in the system. One thing you need to know is that if this radiator cap is hot, or if you have what's called an expansion tank on most cars now, which it looks like a plastic tank and has a cap on it. If it's pressurized, you don't want to open it if it's hot, or even if it's warm, because that's under pressure. It can actually boil up as soon as you open that cap and release that pressure, and now you can get second or third degree burns. So always touch it with the back of our hand. Make sure it's not hot. If it's cool to the touch, you can go ahead and open this. So let's crack this open, and let's look at what our coolant level is first. We're going to check that coolant level. I'm looking for a clear fluid. I shouldn't see anything that's milky or hazy in here. If you have a hydrometer tool, we can also use this. This is pretty easy to use. This tells you if the coolant and antifreeze is doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to suck this up to the line here. So as you can see here, my arrow is pointing just below this -20. So I'm at probably about -15 or -18. I probably actually want to change this coolant out, especially if it's colder climate come winter, because sometimes we get weather that's actually colder than this. And so I probably want to put some fresh fluid in and bring that freeze point up to that -45 or even more. So on this side, I'm about 260. That's my boiling point protection. And again, I want that a little bit higher. I probably would want to change this fluid out, put fresh fluid in it, mix it with the water. Usually 50-50 mix is fine unless you're in a super cold climate. 50% distilled water, 50% coolant antifreeze is usually what you want to go with. But make sure you use distilled water, because tap water, especially if you've got a heavy mineral content, will actually damage the inside of our cooling system if we use that tap water. So my overflow tank is not a pressurized system. It's just when our expansion gets a little too high for our cap, it will actually run over here and overfill this, and we're going to basically use this as a holding tank for our coolant. When the engine cools down, it'll actually suck the coolant back through the hose and back into our radiator. But I'm just checking the level. It's kind of hard to see, but I've got a mark right here. It says full cold. So I should have my coolant up to this level right here. I also want to open up the cap, look down inside, make sure it's clear, make sure it's not milky or hazy. I can use my hydrometer on this as well. Dip my hydrometer in here and check and get a sample of that, make sure it's consistent with what I'm seeing in my radiator. That would also be fine. But if this is a pressurized cap, it says caution, do not open. That is an expansion tank, and you got to be careful with that cap because it was under pressure. This one is not under pressure, but the coolant may be hot, so just be aware of that. So I've got my washer tank here. I don't have anything to check the level, so typically I just top it off with washer fluid. Again, you don't want to use tap water on this because that can clog the jets, especially with hard water and deposits. The hoses and tips are so small, it can clog that up. So you generally want to buy what they sell at the store for your windshield, and that will be just fine. You won't have to worry about clogged tips in general. So we have one more item to check as far as our fluids go. This is our brake fluid and brake fluid reservoir. What we're looking for on the outside, typically we have a mark that says maximum or full, and then another one below that that says add. This one happens to be right here at the maximum, and my fluid level is right at the maximum. If you can't see it, you can give it a little shake and see where the fluid goes, or shine a light through this, and that will transmit the light through the inside, through the plastic to the outside. That will also work, but I want to make sure that's at the right level. Another thing I want to do is, if you can take some and just dip it, usually on a tool, but I like to do is just dip a little bit on a paper towel, and I want to make sure that that looks nice and clean. I don't see any dirt or anything in there. There's other things we need to do to check it. I do have a special tool. This tool checks the water content in my brake fluid, and so if you have one of these, use it absolutely, because This is hygroscopic, meaning it holds onto the water. We want to hold on to that. We want to hold on to the water because we don't want that water attacking the inside of our brake lines, because then they rust from the inside out. So we may have this water in here, but that raises our or lowers our boiling point. So if you get too much water in here, that will actually lower our boiling point and cause problems with this. So all I have to do for this tool is I just dip this in, and this lights up to, well, it said 3. We're kind of around the border of 2% and 3%. Probably time to change it if it's above, if it's a 3% or greater, then it's time to change it. If we're 2, it's getting really close. So that's one thing we can check. When you're dealing with brake fluid, make sure that this doesn't get on anything that's painted inside the car, because it'll actually eat through the paint. We want to make sure we clean up after ourselves and wipe down any spills that we may have when we're checking this. Another tool you can use, this checks the copper content inside the fluid. So what we can do is dip this tab in. It's got a little strip. Make sure you dip the right side of the strip in. Dip that in there. Put it on some plastic. Again, don't put it on paint. We're going to let that sit there for about a minute. And then we can compare that to our chart here from 0 all the way up to 300. And based on that color, 0 to 100 is good. 200 to 300, that's got too much copper content in there, and that means we'll also need to replace it. So we'll let that sit there for about another 30 seconds. So I'm going to compare my strip. You can see that is not even close. Keep going up, going up. I'm probably right in this area right here between 2 and 300. So that's also a sign that I want to replace that brake fluid with fresh fluid, and that's going to give me better braking. It's going to be better for the system. So that's how we check our brake fluid. Also, when you're done checking fluids, you want to make sure you wipe down all these places where you checked it. It's just a professional thing to do. Wipe down where the coolant was. Make sure that's all cleaned up. Wipe down the brake fluid, power steering. That just shows that you've been there, you've checked it, you've taken care of those spaces, and now you're good to go. So let's go ahead and check our hoses. So we've got 4 hoses to check. We've got our upper and lower radiator hose, as well as 2 heater hoses in the back, but we're going to check them all the same way. So let me just show you real quick. The only thing I want to do is just give this a squeeze, make sure it's pliable. It should not be super squishy. It also should not be super crunchy. I'm looking at my clamps here, making sure they're secure, making sure there's no obvious leaks just from what I can see here. I'm not pressure testing anything, but I'm just giving it a squeeze, making sure I don't see any bulges or bumps or cracking in here. That's what I'm looking for here. So generally you have one on top, or it might be over to the side, and then you have a second hose over on this side that's usually a little bit farther down, and you want to check that one as well by doing the same method. Find it where it goes in the radiator, and find where it goes into the engine, and you want to give it a squeeze on both ends. Let's take a look at our heater hoses. Now our heater hoses will typically be along the back here where they go through the firewall. I'm looking for 2 hoses that are about an inch in diameter. Typically you have them going right next to one another, right through this firewall into the passenger compartment. But they're going to be rubber hoses, not aluminum or steel hoses. So mine are buried down here. These top hoses are for my AC system, and my heater hoses are actually the ones way down here. And again, they're about an inch diameter. It looks like I actually have 3, but most cars will have 2. But again, I want to reach in here, give them a squeeze, give them a push, make sure that they feel okay, make sure if they're crunching or soft, that's a sign that they're wearing out. But I also want to check both my heater hoses, and in my case, 3 heater hoses, and make sure they're all in good condition. So with my belt, this is a Serpentine belt. I've got these different ribs right here, and I can see already I've got some cracking going on, just a very small amount. But I'm looking on the rib side, and I'm also looking on the back side, like right in here, to make sure I don't have any fraying or wearing out or weird spots in there. I want to push on this and make sure those ribs are still flexible. If they're hard or they don't want to move, that's a sign it's also getting old and it's time to replace it. So let me just show you what it looks like on the outside of the car. It's a little bit easier to see so you know what you're looking for. I want to bend this back a little bit, and I'm looking for any cracks that might be in here. I'm looking on the back side to make sure it's not fraying and that kind of thing. You can also get special tools for checking the belt. This one's made by Gates, and they make another one. I'll just describe that one, but I have this one. What I do is I put this inside the rib of the belt, And if this piece is above the other ribs, I still have enough material there. If this piece is flush or lower than the ribs, that means these ribs have worn out and it's time to replace that belt. You can also just do it by feel. If these feel very brittle, very hard, they're not pliable anymore, that's also a good sign that it's time to replace that belt, because the way belts are made today, sometimes you won't see cracking at all. Who knows? It may look good just visually, but when you feel it and you try and move those ribs, you may find that it's not pliable, it's very crusty, it's very old, it's very rigid, and you don't want that. You need these ribs to be able to move, and you want to make sure you have enough material inside those ribs to make good contact to your pulleys. So that's how we look at our fluids underneath the hood. That's also how we check our belts and check our hoses. If you have any questions or other comments, leave those below, and we'll see you next time.